All right, so here we have a user that we were able to log in, Bob and Bob. Actually, I don't think we have Bob. Notice that it's coming back with a 4.1 unauthorized, right? If Bob is not currently there. But if we do po, right, we log in and we're able to go into the profile. Okay. So what I'd like to be able to do now is that notice that we're coming into the profile page, but notice that we're doing we're still encoding the URL, the ID of the user in the URL, right? So what we'd like to be able to do that is to move the identification of the user, handling of the context of the user, to move that to the server side, right, as opposed to exposing it here on the client side. What instead we'd like to be able to do is go here maybe to the profile page, right? And the profile page would display for us for the currently logged in user and without exposing the ID of the user in the URL or anywhere. Okay. All right. So let's work on that. Right, so let's if we go to the configuration where we configure the navigation, we will have here the configuration of that URL route, right, where we go to the profile. So here's a profile, and right now it goes out to user and then user ID. Right, so let's change that to be instead just profile. Okay. Now if we now load the profile, notice that it's loading, but currently the controller expects the user to be encoded in the URL, right? Instead, what we'd like it to do is to instead use whatever context is in the server, right, in the session of the in the server, right, as opposed to having to encode it here in the URL. Right, so let's do that. Let's change that. Well, first of all, I shouldn't even be able to come into the profile page unless I log in, right? So if I log out, right, and I type, somebody knows that there's a profile page, I shouldn't be allowed to come in here. Okay, notice that some pages should not be available unless you are authenticated. Okay, so let's work on those two things. One, you should not be able to navigate here if you're not logged in, and if you're logged in, the user identity shouldn't be here; it should be over on the server. So to work on that, the way we're going to do that is that we're going to add here in the route, right, some logic that will allow us to control whether you are allowed or not to move in here, right? And the way we do that is by providing a resolve attribute. The resolve attribute says the following things must be true, right, for you to be able to be allowed to navigate to the profile, to this route, right, and instantiate that controller. Okay, and you can list here several functions that allow you to evaluate whether you should be allowed to go here or not, right? And each function will then provide some response, some resolve, right, or some reject on whether you should be allowed to go through or not. Okay. So now the object that we want to end up with, you know, if it resolves, right, if you're allowed to go through, is the context of the current user. Right? We would like to keep track of who the current user is if this resolves successfully. Right? So what we'd like to be able to do is check if you're logged in. So this is a function we're going to be implementing, right? And this is going to go out to the server and say, hey, server, is somebody logged in? Right? And the server is going to say yes or no. If no, then we're going to abort this. We're going to reject the navigation to this route. We're not going to allow you to go here. But if somebody is logged in, we're going to resolve and say yes, you can go through. And by the way, right, this is the current user. Okay. All right, so let's implement that check logged in. We're going to implement it anyway here. We can say function check logged in. Right, so check logged in, what it needs to be able to do is, let me go back to the server and see what they say. Right, see if the server is okay with this. Right, we're going to use a user service. We're going to use the user service. I think we called it user service, didn't we? Yeah, user service. That's what we called it. Okay, and we're going to go and check if they're logged in. We're going to do a logged in function. Okay, we're going to call a logged in function that doesn't exist just yet. We're going to implement it right here. Okay, right. So this logged in function is going to go out back to the server, right, and it's going to use a URL like this, right. Also logged in, right, and it's going to do a post. Again, we're trying to not expose anything here. I guess this could be a get because we're not passing anything actually. We're not passing anything. Well, we're always passing the cookie, right? But that's always in the headers, right? So that's always goes and comes back in the headers. So it could be a get, right? So it's a read operation. So return http.get the URL. And this is going to do a then function. This is going to be a static. This is going to be, ideally, it's going to be the user object. And we just got, well, actually, it's going to be the response. We're going to unwrap it, response. We're going to unwrap it, so return response.data. So this is actually going to be actually the user object or some null or zero or something that is not an object that we were expecting, right? Some flag that would tell us that the user is not there. Right? And so whatever this returns, we can just return it back, and it'll be a promise, and the promise will be whatever object this comes back as. Right? It'll be resolved, and it'll be mapped to the current user. So this current user is going to be this data right here. Right? Okay. All right. So we need to implement this logged in on the server side. So let's go to the server side. So on the server side, we'll do an app.get, right? And it's going to be handled by logged in. Notice that we're going to do this ourselves, right? Presumably somebody has been already logged in. They already live in the session, right? So the only thing we need to do here is to check if request.user exists, right? If it's there, then we can respond. So we can say function logged in request response. So the request.user is here, right? We can do a console log request.user. And we can certainly write some code around whether this user is null, whether this user exists or not, or whatnot, right? We can write a code around that. But Passport also provides some APIs around this, such as is authenticated. So this is just a Boolean saying, it wraps the logic. Is the request null, right? Is it in the session or not, right? Or somebody recently logged in or not? So we can write just code around this. Right? This is a syntactic sugar function, right? That wraps some of this nice logic around it. And here we can just respond whether successfully or not. We can say if it's authenticated, we're going to respond with the request.user. Else, we can respond with something other than the user, or we can respond with an error too, right? However we want to handle it on the client side. Okay. So let's respond it with sending back maybe a 0. It's a very common thing to do. Okay. So on the client, we could decide what to do here, right? We could decide to if it's 0, maybe we can we could navigate to the login page or the home page or something, or give them to a status page, error page or something, right? So let's restart this. We can restart this, and let's go back and refresh, and let's clear some of this. And I'll log in, and notice that it still wants to go to user ID, right? So that's still in the location in the login control. Let's fix that so that it takes you to the profile instead. So that's where that is in the user controller login control probably. Yeah. So login, right? Goes out to login if it's found. If it's not null, or it's going to go to user. So instead, it's going to go where? Profile. Right? So let's try that again. Let's restart. Log in. So po and po. Wait, did we do that? Refresh. Huh. Why is it going there? Login controller, because I am editing the undergraduates. Okay. No, that's not what I meant. Let me undo that. It's this one, right? Okay, let me put it back where it was. Not undergraduates, no. It's the views, user, controller, login control. Here, there we go. All right, so here it is. Right, so log in, then found. If not found, okay, we're going to go where? We're going to go to profile. Profile. There we go. Let's go back. Let's refresh again. Po and po. All right, so it's going to the profile. So it is navigating to the profile, but it doesn't seem like it went out to the server for anything. Let's see. Looks like there's a pending here. Probably in the user. Where is this going? Probably went to the profile. What happened? Did it go to the config? I don't think it went to the config, did it? Let's go to config, make sure that we have the current user. There it is. Check logged in. Check logged in. So this should be coming in here. Let me see. Okay, so it's going in here. Let's step in. Let's step in. So here's the URL. Here's the URL. Let's run that. Okay, here's the response, the data. There it is, the user. Okay, so there's the data, and so that should be what? Oh, okay. So this probably goes into the controller, into the profile controller, because it is successful. Right? It's successful, so it's going to want to go in the profile controller. So let's put a breakpoint right there. Continue. Okay, so it's coming in here. It's coming in here, but notice that it's still written in such a way that it's expecting the user ID in the request, right, in the URL. So we need to refactor that because we're no longer encoding the user ID in the request anymore, right? Instead, all that is coming from the server, and we went to fetch for it, right? We went logged in, and it came back, no? And presumably, when it resolves successfully, it's mapped to that current user object we resolved to. Okay, so let's fix that. Right here in the profile, in the config, see that? So the check logged in, whenever this is resolved, right, it is mapped to the current user right here. So in the controller for the profile, open it up. We no longer have this, right? We no longer are using this. Right? Actually, we don't need the route params anymore. So let's remove that. Instead, what we get here is the current user. Current user is made available by this current user right here. Okay, it's now that object that is resolved from the service. It's injectable, right, to any controller who asks it for by name. Okay, so let's we can now rewrite this and say model.userid right, is equal to the current user ID, right? Current user dot underscore ID. And here, notice that we would have to go back to the server for the user. We don't have to do that anymore. Right? We don't have to do that anymore because we already have the object of the user. We don't have that anymore. So we could do maybe an init function here, which we didn't have before, but all functions should have init functions. So we already have the current user. There it is. Notice that what we used to do is go fetch the user from the server and then render the user. But we already have the user, so we can call render user right here, render user, and we already have the current user that is being injected here from having resolved the user. Okay, so let's refresh this, and let's continue. Response. So we're in the controller, and there it is. Notice the current user. See the current user? Notice that it has all the information because we already fetched this in the server. There's no need to fetch it again. Right? We can inject it anywhere we want, so that when we come in here, right, we have the current user, which is going to be now rendered. There it is, PO. Right, so this PO came from that resolve. Yes? Made sense? Okay. All right, so everything else stays the same. Notice that the profile page, see that? We no longer need to encode the user ID. Right? It's no longer there. Okay. If we go to websites, notice that we still have the user ID because we encoded it in the user ID, but we still would need to change this, right? Because again, we don't want to encode the user ID from here, right? Now this could be something like this, just website. See that? Because anywhere where you need to know who the user is, right? The server knows. The server knows. There's no need for me to pass you the user ID ever again for anything. Make sense? Right? And so in this assignment, one of the things that you're tasked with is remove user ID from everywhere on the client side. And instead, use those resolves. Make sense? So notice that this website here, we can also refactor that without it having to know about the current user ID on the client side. And we'll do that next.